From a burning bush in the desert to the parting of a mighty sea, one man dared to defy an empire. His name was Moses, and he was chosen by God to lead his people, the Israelites, out of slavery in Egypt. Moses was a shepherd, tending his flock in the wilderness, when he encountered a sight that would change his life forever, a bush engulfed in flames, yet unconsumed. As Moses drew closer, a voice called out from the heart of the fire. It was the voice of God, and he spoke to Moses, charging him with a sacred mission. God had seen the suffering of the Israelites in Egypt. He had heard their cries for deliverance from Pharaoh's tyranny, and he had chosen Moses to be their shepherd, to lead them out of bondage and into a land promised to their forefathers. Fear and doubt gripped Moses' heart. He was but a simple shepherd, untrained for such a momentous task. But God reassured him, promising to be with him every step of the way. He bestowed upon Moses a staff, a symbol of divine authority, and instructed him to return to Egypt and confront Pharaoh. Armed with God's word and filled with a newfound purpose, Moses set out on his perilous journey. He left behind the familiar life of a shepherd and embraced the mantle of leadership thrust upon him. He would become the voice of the voiceless, the champion of the oppressed, and the instrument of God's will. Moses returned to Egypt, his heart heavy with the burden of his people's suffering. He saw their pain etched on their faces, felt their despair in the air. Generations had endured the yoke of slavery, their spirits crushed under the weight of Pharaoh's oppression. He sought out his brother Aaron, and together they went before Pharaoh. They stood before the mighty ruler of Egypt, a symbol of power and opulence, and delivered God's message. "Let my people go," Moses declared, his voice echoing with the authority of the divine. He demanded that Pharaoh release the Israelites from their bondage and allow them to journey into the wilderness to worship their God. Pharaoh, consumed by pride and blinded by his own power, scoffed at Moses' words. He refused to acknowledge the God of the Israelites, dismissing him as a lesser deity unworthy of his attention. He mocked Moses' plea, declaring that the Israelites were his property to be used and discarded at his whim. Enraged by Pharaoh's defiance, Moses warned him of God's wrath. He spoke of plagues and calamities that would befall Egypt if Pharaoh refused to heed God's command. But Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, his mind clouded by arrogance and disdain. He dismissed Moses' warnings as empty threats, believing himself to be above the reach of any god. And so began a battle of wills, a clash between the might of an empire and the power of the divine. Moses, armed with God's authority, stood firm against Pharaoh's stubbornness. With each refusal, with each act of defiance, the shadow of God's judgment loomed larger over Egypt. The first plague struck with terrifying swiftness. The lifeblood of Egypt, the Nile River, turned to blood. The stench of death filled the air as fish died and the river became undrinkable. Yet Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. He refused to acknowledge the hand of God in this disaster, attributing it instead to sorcery or some natural phenomenon. One after another, the plagues descended upon Egypt, each more devastating than the last. Frogs swarmed the land, covering every surface. Gnats and flies filled the air, tormenting both man and beast. Livestock died, crops withered, and boils erupted on the skin of the Egyptians. Still, Pharaoh clung to his pride, refusing to release the Israelites. He surrounded himself with his advisors, seeking a way to break the cycle of plagues, to find a solution that would appease his gods and restore order to his kingdom. Terror gripped the hearts of the Egyptians. They had never witnessed such devastation, such a relentless assault on their land and their way of life. Many began to whisper that the God of the Israelites was indeed a powerful deity, one to be feared and respected, but Pharaoh remained unmoved. He had built his empire on the backs of slaves, on the belief that he was answerable to no one, not even the gods. He refused to yield. even as the plagues intensified and the cries of his people grew louder. Hailstorms of unprecedented fury pounded the land, destroying crops and shattering buildings. Locusts descended in a dark cloud, devouring every green thing in their path. Darkness, thick and suffocating, enveloped Egypt for 3 days, plunging the land into a terrifying abyss. The Egyptians, accustomed to the life-giving rays of their sun god Ra, were plunged into a darkness that seemed to consume their very souls. Through it all, Moses remained steadfast, a beacon of hope for his people and a harbinger of judgment for Pharaoh. He stood before the Egyptian ruler, his voice unwavering, his message clear. "Let my people go," he repeated, time and again, his words a testament to his faith in the power of his God. The 10th and final plague was the most devastating of all. God, in his righteous anger, sent the angel of death to pass over Egypt, striking down the firstborn son of every household, from the humblest peasant to Pharaoh himself. The cries of mourning echoed through the streets of Egypt as families awoke to find their firstborn sons dead. The air was thick with grief and the stench of death. Pharaoh, his heart finally broken by the loss of his own son, relented. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the dead of night, his face pale, his voice trembling. "Go," he rasped, "take your people and leave this land, and pray that your God will show mercy on me." And so, after centuries of bondage, the Israelites were free. They gathered their meager possessions and prepared to depart, their hearts filled with a mixture of joy, trepidation, and disbelief. They had endured generations of slavery, their pleas for mercy ignored, their hopes for freedom dashed time and again, yet now, by the power of their God, they were finally leaving the land of their oppression. Section 6. Darkness falls upon Egypt. Under a moonless sky, the Israelites began their exodus, a vast multitude of men, women, and children, their steps light, despite the weight of their burdens. They followed Moses, their deliverer, their guide, their conduit to the divine, but Pharaoh, his grief giving way to anger and regret, had a change of heart. He realized the magnitude of his loss, the emptiness that now permeated his palace, his kingdom, his very being. He ordered his chariots prepared, his soldiers assembled. He would pursue the fleeing Israelites and bring them back to Egypt, even if it meant their deaths and his own damnation. The Israelites, guided by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, made their way across the desert. They were a people newly freed, but their journey was far from over. The wilderness stretched before them, a vast and unforgiving landscape that tested their faith and their resolve. Section 7. A night of weeping. Word reached the Israelites that Pharaoh's army was in pursuit, its chariots thundering across the desert sands, their former captors intent on reclaiming their human property. Fear gripped the hearts of the Israelites. They were trapped between the pursuing Egyptians and the Red Sea, their escape seemingly cut off. They cried out to Moses, their voices filled with despair. "Were there not enough graves in Egypt?" they lamented, "that you have brought us out here to die in the wilderness?" Their faith, so recently kindled, flickered in the face of this new threat. Moses, his own heart heavy with the weight of responsibility, reassured his people. "Do not be afraid," he declared, his voice echoing with the unwavering certainty of God's promise. "Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." Section 8. Through the Sea. As the sun began its final descent, casting long shadows across the desert, Moses raised his staff and stretched out his hand over the Red Sea. A powerful east wind began to blow, splitting the waters and creating a dry path through the midst of the sea. The Israelites, their fear giving way to awe, walked through the parted waters, the walls of water towering on either side of them. All through the night they journeyed, the dry seabed beneath their feet, the miracle of their deliverance unfolding before their eyes. Pharaoh's army, blinded by rage and consumed by their pursuit, followed the Israelites into the heart of the sea. They drove their chariots onto the dry seabed, their horses' hooves pounding against the exposed earth, their cries of pursuit swallowed by the wind. Section 9. A people freed. As dawn approached, the last of the Israelites reached the opposite shore. Moses, standing at the water's edge, watched as Pharaoh's army, still in hot pursuit, reached the middle of the parted sea. And then, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth, the waters crashed back together, engulfing Pharaoh's army in their watery embrace. The chariots, the horses, the soldiers, all were swept away by the raging torrent, their cries silenced beneath the waves. The Israelites, safe on the opposite shore, watched in stunned silence as the waters of the Red Sea returned to their normal state, leaving no trace of the Egyptian army or their drowned Pharaoh. They had witnessed the power of their God, a power that had delivered them from slavery, parted the waters of the sea, and destroyed their enemies. Their hearts swelled with gratitude and awe. They had been tested, their faith tried, but they had emerged from the crucible of their ordeal stronger, more unified, and forever bound to the God who had set them free.